think our kicking should be excellent. We should have an excellent kicking game because we have excellent kickers. And I think we can find enough speed to play on our kicking teams to have outstanding kicking. Defensively, we're a question mark at this time, although we have our best football players for 2 or 4 of our own defense. But we haven't replaced Lyles, haven't had to replace the others that we lost. So it was ahead of the offense most of the spring, but very, very thin, particularly up front. Offensively, I thought it would be good, but actually, with the exception of Art Trout, a tight end will return every man in the end. And they don't look better than they did last fall, and they weren't good enough last fall. Hopefully, we have a lot of them, a lot of injuries, but hopefully they'll brace up and somebody will come forward. If they have any strength, it should be in numbers on offense. Our biggest weakness, I think, would be in lack of numbers on defense.
The group arrived in Tuskegee at the Butler Chapel AME Church at 4:30 this afternoon. The caravan began in Carrollton, Alabama yesterday when women from all over the South gathered for the day's session. The group left Carrollton this morning by car and drove all the way to Tuskegee. The members are pushing for the extension of the Voting Rights Act and the freedom of Maggie Bozeman and Julia Wilder. Mrs. Wilder entered the church while those around stood and applauded. Mrs. Bozeman was unable to attend. Tuskegee Mayor Johnny Ford says both women aren't allowed to attend rallies, but as mayor, he made the decision to allow Mrs. Wilder to come. Then Evelyn Lowry spoke for the extension of the Voting Rights Act, which she says is endangered legislation at this point.
The Voters' Rights Act is very watered down at this point. The action of the subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee threatens to produce the extension of a Voting Rights Act that will be like a bird without wings, and a dog without teeth, and a fish that cannot swim.
Mrs. Lowry told the group it's time to get their priorities straightened out and commit themselves to correct some of the problems. She says there are other issues, such as black children living in poverty and the Reagan budget cuts that need to be addressed. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News in Tuskegee.
don't even know, tell you the truth.
I know you said something about, what, Laredo or putting on the weight for.
Their visit to Montgomery was the first since the French student pilots were killed in training from 1943 to 1952. About 5,000 French soldiers received navigation training in the United States during that time. Today, the families prayed for those who lost their lives during the Second World War for the ideals of freedom. Family members say the French pilots paid the highest price for freedom and peace, which is still being enjoyed. The families gathered at the tombstone to see who is buried in Oakwood Cemetery. Only 20 graves remain after 80 were relocated in France. After a visit to the old Craig Airfield in Selma, where other French aviators were trained, the families returned to France on Wednesday. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
And treat and teach each student the same. They are not willing to follow the same standards that students are beginning to become motivated when they realize that eventually there's going to be an exit exam they have to take, and they see that they have to take these tests. They are working harder. Further than that, it is beginning to motivate the teachers. Teachers are taking more of an interest in the children's work, in the curriculum. They are finding that some of the things that they're supposed to be teaching are not included in the curriculum, and also that there are gaps in the textbooks. Finally, the teachers have begun to once again bring in the parents. But it is nice to be able to share with you some of my views on what is happening to education.
During the legislature's battle over the 14% versus 16% teacher pay raise, the Department of Youth Services became a ping-pong ball of sorts. Some contend DYS was being moved out of the education budget and into the general fund budget to make room for the extra money needed to fund the larger teacher pay raise. Others say DYS was being transferred back to its original home, the general fund budget. Whatever the case, the Senate wanted DYS in the general fund, the House wanted it in the education budget. Today, a conference committee of House and Senate members working on a settlement of that problem threw a cloud of doubt over which budget DYS would be funded from. Coming into the conference committee, DYS was scheduled a definite $9.6 million in the general fund. Coming out of the committee, DYS was given $12.2 in the general fund, but without certainty. The money will be appropriated by the governor if it's available. The conferees said they weren't afraid of providing this conditional funding, feeling certain the governor would come back later with an amendment taking care of DYS. The $9.6 million taken from DYS was then divided up, $7 million to Medicaid, $1.2 million to mental health, and $1 million to prisons. When the Senate originally slipped DYS into the general fund, they had to take $6 million from pensions and security to make room within the projected revenues. But when DYS lost its certain funding today, the $6 million wasn't returned to pensions and security because the conferees said they were emphatically told by PNS officials that they could live without it. This conference committee report now goes back to the House and Senate tomorrow, where the entire membership will have a chance to review the compromise budget. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
And Watergate and
Ms.
everything.
Gunter said she was happy to join the Montgomery JCs to tell them how the treasurer's office works, but she seemed even happier for a chance to campaign. Ms. Gunter started off by telling the JCs how much she admires their work in civic programs and politics. Ms. Gunter cited several of her accomplishments in the last few years as treasurer, including widespread investments of state money, which she says are a major source of state revenue. Ms. Gunter also says she's pushed to keep the state money in Alabama banks.
And I really think that the money should be available all over the state to all of the banks and available to the taxpayers, the small businessmen, the consumers, and the farmers of this state for loans. And some states do put their money out on this, and North Carolina,
summing up her message
for
to the
one,
group of
readiness
mainly
of the state,
businessmen
and
by
this
saying, I'm taking good care of your money. Tom Coleman, WSFA TV News.
This is apropos of nothing, but there are a few suffering because of the high interest rate. But when the interest rate, the warrants that are drawn on the state treasurer, we process thousands of the bonded indebtedness of the state, and this at the present time amounts to, you'll see a tremendous increase in the oil and gas. Oil severance was a good thing for some people, not so good for others, I guess. But anyway, says they're going to run for treasurer. You tell them we already got one. Thank you.
Julius was convicted of first-degree murder in Birmingham in 1972 and was serving a life sentence for his conviction. He was imprisoned at Draper Correctional Facility and was working on the Draper work release staff when he was issued an 8-hour pass on January 29, 1978. Prosecutors say they intend to prove that Julius, while on his 8-hour pass, went to the home of his cousin, 29-year-old Susie Bell Sanders, raped and murdered her, and then returned to the prison. Julius' defense attorney, George Cameron, told the court that his client was convicted earlier on what he called highly circumstantial evidence. One key witness testified that he saw the automobile that Julius had borrowed at the home of Miss Sanders on the afternoon that she had been murdered. Miss Sanders' fiancé at the time of her death testified that he had given her approximately $30 in cash, either on Friday night or Saturday morning before her death on Sunday. Further testimony by a city jailer who booked Julius on the evening he was arrested testified he had taken a $10 bill and a $20 bill from Julius, along with some $1 bills. So far, the prosecution has presented more than a dozen witnesses and is expected to send at least 9 more to the witness stand, with the first day of the trial expected to last until late tonight. From the Montgomery County Courthouse, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
I don't even know, tell you the truth. Well, they said something about, what, Laredo or somewhere on the way for.
Their dreams mingled with our own. O Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love.
Institutions that she benefited. I was amused and subjected to, which have been the lowest ones so that all when they realize that eventually there's going to be an exit exam they have to take, and they see that they have to take these tests, they are working hard. Clubs, I have found, really, without exception, they're all outstanding groups. Don't say my... But it is nice to be able to share with you some of my views on what is happening. Treat and teach each student the same. They are not willing to follow the same standards that all the students have been subjected to, which have been...
We're going to line up in a three-man backfield a lot. And I said for two reasons, mostly two reasons, is that I want to get Joan and Bengals the game at the same time. The wide people, where they got to cover a lot of field. And the other thing is to, where we can dictate, we quarterback can say who's going to carry the ball rather than defense. But when you run a triple option, you don't know who's going to carry the ball after the ball is snapped. And you read the first man and the second. You have to read the defense determines who's going to carry the ball on triple option. We can run a triple option out of the eye, or brown, or blue, or whatever you want to call it, also, and let our end become a lead blocker instead of a halfback.
From Carrollton to Selma to Montgomery. Now I want to call the roll of a few people. Some of
he says it needs to be enforced and extended indefinitely.
And the message we send about the Voting Rights Act and about jobs and about student aid and about the cutbacks and about the arms race is basically a message from the heart of black America to the mind and soul of white America that we ain't going back. We ain't going to see the clock turn back. We've come too far.
Yes, sir.
And we ain't going to be turned around.
Reverend Jesse Jackson of the Chicago-based Operation Push.
We're here today because there has been a decided but an undeclared war on black people. We march today because this administration has shifted job training to military training. We're here today because they're trying to turn students into soldiers.
I am the child of two, too much, too little, too late, the child of...
The group began marching in the rain across the Tuskegee Institute campus. The members will ride to Albany, Georgia for a mass meeting tonight and go out in the neighborhoods tomorrow for a voter registration drive. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
For the last several years, the Department of Youth Services has lived off of money from the education budget. But this year, the Senate switched DYS to the general fund. Many say that was to create more money for a 16% rather than 14% teacher pay raise. Today, the 3 House and 3 Senate members in the conference committee decided to take the guaranteed $9.6 million for DYS out of the general fund and instead offer DYS about $12.2 million to be released by the governor if it's available. DYS now has this conditional funding in the proposed general fund conference report and the pending education budget that hangs in limbo in the House. The $9.6 million that had been guaranteed to DYS was then divided up. $7 million was given to the Medicaid department, $1.2 million to mental health, and $1 million to prisons. The conference committee report that was hammered out this afternoon will be taken to the full Senate and House tomorrow, where they'll have the option of either agreeing or disagreeing with it. Earlier today, Secretary of State Don Siegelman decided to send the proposed constitutional amendment on budget isolation back to the legislature. Budget isolation was proposed by Governor James as a means of putting priority on the budgets. The House and Senate recalled the proposed amendment in a resolution that specifically bypassed the governor. The governor argued he should have been given an option to act on the recall resolution, but Siegelman says he feels comfortable the House and Senate acted properly in bypassing the governor. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
In Alabama's history that a
You'd have thought it was the final out of the World Series. Well, not quite, but it was almost as sweet for the Atlanta Braves, who came from behind to beat Houston for their 11th win in a row.
The attitude of everybody when we were behind was, hey, we started a little fire in the dugout and got everybody going and came back. And we had a feeling that we just don't think we're going to lose when we're out there.
Biff Pocoroba made sure the Braves didn't lose their shot at the history books. His double in the 8th drove in the winning runs as Atlanta tied the Major League record for consecutive victories at the start of the season.
It's just a big thrill for our ball club to come back against a ball club that's in a house that's tough to beat anybody.
Well, really, most of the credit for the streak has to go to the pitchers. They've kept us close in every game, and they haven't given up a lot of runs.
But the Atlanta pitchers know as well as anyone that it's too early to be thinking World Series, even if they are pitching as though the 7th game is on the line.
I think the first thing you got to do is you play only one game at a time, and the only thing we're looking forward to now is Tuesday night facing Cincinnati.
Senate Christian Leadership Conference President Joseph Lowry says efforts are continuing for full pardons for Maggie Bozeman and Julia Wilder.
Gentlemen of the press, we want to thank you for covering
the Legal Defense Fund. I've been in contact with that office in New York. I have been down meeting with Solomon C. They are preparing action in the federal courts. In the meantime, we're continuing to flood the Pardon and Parole Board with demand for their release. So we're working on 2 fronts for Mrs. Bozeman and Mrs. Wilder, and we will continue unrelentingly until they are free and at home.
Of other distinguished persons representing motive of the 1982 voting rights.
But the impact of our vote has been denied and undercut.
Because we recognize the presence of Boyd
we find that
Bosma.
poll tax and literacy tests are no longer used to deny us the right to vote. But gerrymandering, annexation, and at-large election as forms have in effect undercut the intent of the '65 Voting Rights Act. To that end, we have this obligation to march until the Voting Rights Act is extended.
Members of the United Auto Workers of America pledged their energy and money for the march. The marchers plan to go across Georgia, North and South Carolina, and Virginia. They are expected to reach Washington, D.C. by June 23rd. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News in Tuskegee.
Well, we've got Sonny Schroyer who played Enos on television. It's going to be here. We got Jimmy Best, who plays the sheriff, Sheriff Coltrane on Dukes of Hazzard, will be here. Leslie Nielsen, whose new show, Police Squad, I thought was just wonderful. He'll be here.
Before we run out of time, we have some tickets for the show, right? Quickly on the show.
We've got some tickets. We haven't sold out yet, and we'd really like everybody to help us. And it's the show at the Civic Center at 8 o'clock Saturday night. We should come by and buy a ticket and help the children. It's 10 years now, and we'd like to make this the big one.
State Department of Forensic Sciences expert Thomas Hopen told the court that he obtained a 9-inch head hair from the underwear of Julius and said the hair could have been that of 29-year-old Susie Bell Sanders, who was raped and strangled in 1978, allegedly by Julius. Hopen, who participated in the investigation of the Atlanta murders last year, also used a series of micrographic slides to show the court 3 different carpet fibers which were taken from Julius's clothing. Hopen compared the samples to ones police took from Miss Sanders' home. He says in his opinion the original fibers found in Julius's clothing could have come from the scene of the murder. Julius, who was convicted of murdering his cousin in 1978 while on an 8-hour pass from Draper Correctional Facility, was sentenced to life in prison, but is now being retried under the new death penalty law. prosecution is expected to rest its case early tomorrow. From the Montgomery County Courthouse, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
School officials say the high school, built in 1908, was slated to be recognized as a state historical landmark. The blaze destroyed 7 classrooms, including a junior high science laboratory, the principal's and guidance counselor's offices, and the library. Officials believe the fire started in the science lab between 8 and 9 o'clock and spread quickly through the 2-story colonial structure. The school's principal, M.B. Cosby, arrived on the scene shortly after 9 o'clock. He said he wanted to save several school records but could not go inside the burning building. Cosby says the fire is a temporary setback for the 600 students.
We're going to rebuild as soon as possible, but in the meantime, we're going to shift some students around to the elementary school and to some various classrooms on this campus, and school will be back in operation in a very short time.
School officials say the high school will be closed tomorrow, and an official announcement on when it will reopen is expected sometime tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, plans are underway to try and rebuild Alabama's oldest state-supported county high school. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Plantersville.
The problem is with the contingency fund, the money not committed to specific projects. The mayor's proposal includes just more than $313,000 in the contingency fund. That's out of approximately $3 million offered to the city by the Federal Office of Housing and Urban Development. But as the council began readjusting the mayor's plan for spending the money, the contingency fund started dropping, stopping only when it had almost reached the $90,000 mark. At one point, District 7 Councilwoman Alice Reynolds tried to check the draining of dollars from the contingency fund. She asked for a recess before acting on any more of the amendments to remove money from the contingency so the council could look at the impact of all the proposed amendments. Councilman John Starr attempted to transfer money from other projects into the contingency fund, but his motion was tabled until the council had already approved the budget for the HUD money. At that point, Starr withdrew the motion and said the council acted with total irresponsibility by allowing the contingency fund to drop so low, what he called dangerously low. One of the mayor's assistants, Jack Hogg, says he is certainly not comfortable with the contingency fund as low as it is, but he says the city will do the best that it can. Several councilmen argued that there is nothing wrong with lowering the contingency funds. One councilman said he could remember very few times, if any, that the contingency fund has been exhausted, while other council members suggested if there are problems later on, other money in the community development programs can be transferred wherever it's needed. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The prosecution continued its case this morning by presenting 4 more witnesses. The most important testimony came from a cousin of the victim, who told the court that she had telephoned her cousin, 29-year-old Susie Bell Sanders, only a few hours before her death. She said that during the conversation, Miss Sanders told her to call back later because her cousin Bobo was visiting her. The prosecution claims that Bobo is a nickname for Arthur James Julius. They say this would indicate he was at Miss Sanders' home the afternoon she was murdered. But Julius denies having been at his cousin's home that day. Instead, he told the court in testimony taken during the last trial that he was with Miss Sanders' mother at the time Miss Sanders' death. A claim the mother denies. During closing arguments, Julius was allowed to address the all-white jury and told them that his nickname is Buddy and not Bobo. Julius's attorney, George Cameron, told the court that all of the evidence against his client was circumstantial and not conclusive enough to convict a man of capital murder. Regarding the motive for the killing, the prosecution said Julius was a sexual pervert because of evidence gathered at the crime scene and said he had killed Miss Sanders for his sadistic pleasure. The jury began deliberating at 2:30 and is still behind closed doors at this hour. From the Montgomery County Courthouse, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
I do very strongly believe that with the low profit margin that people in agriculture are able to earn, that we need to have land that is in agricultural production appraised based on the profit that can be earned. And then when that land's converted to some other purpose, I favor having like a 5-year recapture provision where you would come back and tax that land at its best use. But as long as it remains in agricultural production, then I'm for taxing it based on the use to which it is actually put. Most agricultural property is passed on from family to family, and if we have a tax system that drives it out of agricultural production, what we're going to ultimately have in this state and in this country are a few large corporate farmers who will dictate the price of food, or else the shelves of our supermarkets will be empty.
There wasn't any big fight today as expected, as Governor James' proposed change to the current use property tax measure was narrowly defeated. The governor's staff counted votes most of the day before bringing the issue up in the House. The governor's version was still defeated 54 to 45. Representative Rick Manley conceded the governor's version would have given small farmers a larger tax break, but he said the bill was unconstitutional and that it treated landowners differently. The Senate later joined the House in defeating the governor's proposal on a 19 to 13 vote. The current use bill, supported by Farm Bureau, now goes to the Secretary of State, where it will be certified into law. Earlier in the day, the Conference Committee report on the general fund budget was adopted by the House and Senate. The committee report offered a compromise, resolving the differences between the House and Senate over the funding of the Department of Youth Services. The compromise left DYS without any firm funding, but will fund it if the money is available. DYS faces the same sort of conditional funding in the education budget.
Once the House had passed the general fund budget, the House leadership released its hold on the education budget with a 16% teacher pay raise, sending it on down to the governor as well. The House leadership says it has not changed its position in opposing the 16% teacher pay raise, but some of them privately say they hope the governor will reduce that pay raise in order to make room for some absolute funding for DYS.
The governor, though, still has the option of killing both budgets by simply not acting on them. The Senate today gave final approval to 5 bills relating to Montgomery County, including 2 bills allowing the county to vote on whether it wants bingo for charity. Senators Barry Teague and Cordy Taylor abstained from that vote, leaving Senator Don Harrison the only Montgomery County senator to vote for the bingo bill. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
officials say the blaze destroyed the original Dallas County High School, built in 1908. It was the oldest state-supported county high school and was slated to be recognized as an historical landmark. The blaze destroyed the two-story colonial structure, which housed 7 classrooms, the principal's and guidance counselor's offices, and library. Officials believe the fire started in the junior high science laboratory and spread quickly through the old building. School officials expect to rebuild, but aren't sure when. In the meantime, classes remain closed tomorrow for the 600 students, but officials say they expect to reopen the school possibly by Thursday. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Plantersville.
Everybody understood what we were talking about. Certainly, I passed out the weekend ground reports and show where you see 25,000 CD under the column, Bowler Heights Park improvement, maybe 2 or 3 or 4.
And hospitality shown to them, which they have asked that I give to the city. So I was
right. Yes. All right. Get that down. Correct. Get that down.
Incorrect. Further discussion on the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a presentation.
Incorrect. Further discussion on the motion.
Many of the bills that passed last night only apply to local areas. The others apply statewide. Among the more controversial bills to pass is the current use property tax measure, which was assigned an act number this morning by the Secretary of State's office. That current use measure is now law. The state's 2 major budgets were sent to the governor, and they now sit in his office along with nearly 100 other bills, both local and statewide in nature, waiting for his signature. Officials in the governor's office say the governor will probably wait until this weekend before sitting down with his legal advisor and others and decide which of the bills he intends to sign into law, which of the bills he intends to offer amendments to, and which of the bills he either intends to veto or kill by simply not acting on them. The governor has reportedly still not decided what to do with the state's 2 major budgets. The budget sent to him would provide state employees with a 12% salary increase and teachers with a 16% salary increase. The governor says he'd rather see those increases at 10% and 14% respectively, saying that is all the state can afford. The governor's aides are compiling the options the governor has, which include the governor offering some changes that would reduce the salary increases, or vetoing or killing the bills by simply not acting on them, and then starting over from scratch in a special session later this summer. The legislature will be back Monday for the final day of the session, when a number of bills could be passed on the last minute, and the members will wait for any proposed changes or vetoes from the governor to bills that passed last night. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Bill.
Dr. Funderburk told reporters he's quite pleased with the school's appropriation, which is part of the special education budget that is now waiting for Governor Fob James' signature.
We think that this is a good budget for Auburn University. We think it is an exceptionally good budget relative to the economic condition in our state.
And I'm sure most of you are aware that during the last 3 years that our actual appropriation from the state has increased 10.2%, or an average of just over 3 1/3% a year. So when you have the prospect of 10 to 12% in 1 year, you get a little bit excited about it. So we feel good about the budget. We feel better than we have in a long time.
Dr. Funderbuck says the 12.15% overall increase for next year will allow the school to address some priorities, such as modest salary increases, increases in maintenance support, and in library support. From Auburn University, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Introduced by Senator Lowe. Bill, of course, it's not law yet. It's passed both houses, as you know, and has been sent to the governor. We think that this is a good budget for Auburn University. We think it is an exceptionally good budget relative to the economic condition in our state. And I'm sure most of you are aware that during the last 3 years that our actual appropriation from the state has increased 10.2%, or an average of just over 3 1/3% a year. So when you have the prospect of 10 to 12% in 1 year, you get a little bit excited about it. So we feel good about the budget. We feel better than we have in a long time.
Look forward when I could hear that broadcast and feel that we were making progress and things were going good. But we very rarely hear that now. We're saying today to all of us, and it's well, there before we had the days of the tube, about 25 to 33% royalty contracts from that per day. And that all is selling for $39.80 a barrel. Utilized to the best interest of his people. And I think we're being good stewards of that money, frankly. I'm pleased with
oil products. Say as a hypothetical that they ordered 150. When McKinsey would deliver oil products, bill dues, they don't elaborate too much, but it's based in Montgomery. The indictment charges dues with the theft of over $361,000. Ellen Harrison, who of course works with us in white collar crime, and y'all all know Paula, and figure out what their cost was. And that's how you we arrive at the restitution figure.
Alabama, the beautiful, you're beautiful to me.
It took over a year to make the new state publicity film and cost $108,000. But officials of the State Bureau of Publicity and Information think it will all be worthwhile if the film can draw more people to what they call Alabama's ever-growing tourism industry. The film was made by an Auburn television and film production company, Perspectives 3. Producer and director Jane Russian says she wanted to create a film Alabamians could be proud of. The film is 36 minutes long and examines the state not only in terms of places to see, but events around the state. And if today's audience is any indicator, the film should be well received.
Excellent. I'm very, very impressed.
It took and went through all the areas of the state, and I think it covered them and really tells the Alabama story. We've got a lot to offer.
State officials hope to start distributing copies of the film within the next few weeks, sending them to groups everywhere that want a good look at the state before they plan their summer trips. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News. It took over a year to make. It cost the State Bureau of Publicity and Information $108,000, and it was presented with all the fanfare of a Hollywood production. There was popcorn and even a live band, and then the moment they all waited for.
Alabama, the beautiful, you're beautiful to me.
The film is 36 minutes long, edited down from almost 10 miles of film, a job that took 6 weeks. It presents the state as 5 regions from the Gulf to North Alabama and can be split up to present each segment as a short film on a particular part of the state. The film was created by a television and film production company from Auburn, Perspectives 3. Producer and director Jane Rushin says she tried to show as much of the state as possible, focusing on events as well as places in the state.
We think it's a great display for the state, and it covers a wide range of things. People look happy in Alabama, and we think that's good for the state.
Officials with the Bureau of Publicity and Information hope to start distributing the film in just a few weeks, trying to bring even more business to what they call an ever-growing tourism industry in the state. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
These are indeed the hot Atlanta Braves. For the 5th time in the last 6 games of this winning streak, they came from behind to pull it out last night. The Reds held a 2-0 lead going into the bottom of the 2nd. That's when Chris Chambliss unloads on Frank Pastore, knocking this solo home run to right center, cutting the Reds' lead to 2-1. Rafael Ramirez then pulls Atlanta even in the 3rd. His leadoff home run here to the foul pole in left tied the game at 2. Still in the 3rd, Glenn Hubbard on first with a walk, and Claudell Washington gets the game winner. A long triple to deep center, driving in Hubbard to make it 3-2 Braves. Washington then scored on a wild pitch, and Atlanta held on for their 12th straight win, 4-2 over the Reds.
Tension was real bad before the game. I mean, you know, there are so many people around talking about it. You know, you didn't want to think about it, but I think the fans just helped out the whole game. They just kept us pumped up.
Everybody picked everybody up, and Bedrock came in for Boggsy and shut him down for a couple innings, did his job, and got the win. And I'm just ecstatic. I can't believe it.
Got to make sure you come down to earth tomorrow. And celebrate the hell out of it tonight. I really enjoy it. There's no other club that's ever done it. Baseball's been around over 100 years. It's a very proud thing to do.
The Braves try to extend that streak to 13 straight at home tonight against Cincinnati. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
A round table discussing international affairs. So I think those are basically the issues. So keep that line of communication open, because many of those policies are in place. And so we must learn how, among the persons who will be honored during this conference, of the Voting Rights Act, how much we see the need for the proposed cutbacks in health and social services and Medicare and medicine, international affairs. So I think those are basically the issues. We'll now open it up to any questions that the press may have, and any of our mayors.
School officials and students are aware, and have been for some time, that drug activity takes place in the church parking lot adjacent to the high school. But it was here Monday and Tuesday morning that officials say several students were caught either possessing and selling drugs, specifically marijuana.
School and police officials began investigating last week when a concerned parent called to report possible drug activity in the church parking lot. Officials believe 2 marijuana joints were involved when the students were caught before classes began Monday and Tuesday morning. The officials have taken disciplinary action against the students. Most have been suspended for 3 days, some indefinitely, and 2 have withdrawn from school. Also, school officials say 4 of these students have been sent home for 3 days for going to class high. Assistant school principal James Bozeman says that's a bigger problem than selling or possessing marijuana.
We do not deal with selling and possession on school grounds as much as we do with students who possibly will get out in the morning, smoke marijuana, and come to school under the influence of marijuana.
Bozeman says drug activity is not a major problem at the school. Some of these students don't think so either. Several will tell why tonight at 10. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. Most of these students are aware of drug activity at the school. They say it's not a big problem and that it exists not only at Lee, but at most area high schools. But at Lee, the students say marijuana smoking, sale, or possession is usually done in the church parking lot adjacent to the school.
And that's just, usually when you hear a kid say, well, I'm in the church parking lot, you think, well, they're, doing something they shouldn't be doing over there.
The students say they don't believe the suspensions will stop marijuana activity at local high schools. Some say most will just curtail their involvement.
It woke a lot of them. They're more cautious, if anything.
But it won't stop the activity.
Well,
I really can't say. Most likely around the school, the school area. But as far as home and, out in parties, no, ma'am, I don't think so.
The others, they'll be scared now, scared to do it, scared of getting caught.
Also, several of these students admit classmates do come to school high, and likely officials, they say that's a major concern.
That's probably the only problem that I see. I mean, I know students do it and everything, but when they come into class, I think that's probably the biggest problem. I haven't had it happen but a couple of times, but I know that some people talk about how some people come in high, but I think they do it everywhere, and I know they do it at all schools. I'm just glad that our school's taken a stand on it and trying to stop some of it.
In the meantime, those suspended students will have their cases reviewed tomorrow and Friday. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
According to the White Collar Crime Unit, Royal Products, a bedding manufacturer, has been the victim of an operation in which an employee and a supplier charged the company for materials never received for at least the last 3 years. Deputy District Attorney Ellen Brooks told reporters today the investigation revealed the theft has resulted in a loss to Royal Products of $361,105, and one person has been indicted on theft charges.
The Montgomery County Grand Jury yesterday returned an indictment against Addison M. Dews, alias Bill Dews, who is a 48-year-old male who resides at 2102 McCarter Road here in Montgomery. The indictment charges Dews with the theft of over $361,000. He was arrested late yesterday and placed in the Montgomery County Jail under a $100,000 bond. Never received.
The investigation of the case has been spearheaded by Chief Investigator Clifford Rowe, who says his investigation is continuing. Matt Carmack, WSFA TV
Say
News.
as a hypothetical that they ordered 150.
The 76ers play like the world champions they soon hope to be. When John Drew scored this inside bucket, Atlanta had their last lead of the night at only 10-8. From there, the Sixers went to work. Darryl Dawkins, still recovering from a broken leg earlier this season, played like all world. He was ferocious on the defensive end, and he pumped in a season-high 27 to lead all scorers on the night. The Dr. Julius Erving added 14 in the second quarter. This banker off the glass gave Philadelphia a 44-26 lead. Lionel Hollins was hot from outside. He added 11. This shot from the corner gave the 76ers a 27-point third-quarter lead. And it didn't stop. Birmingham's Andrew Toney added 10, 2 there on the turnaround. Before it was over, Philadelphia had buried Atlanta 111-76. The Sixers take a 1-0 lead in this best-of-3 mini-series. The Hawks try to regroup for Game 2 Friday night in the Omni. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Councilman Erickson's concern stems from an April 2nd special audit report by a local accounting firm. Erickson says the report, which is expected to be released to the public soon, questioned 2 bank accounts held by the fire department. The Fireman's Fund, which includes money raised by firefighters, and the fire department account, which includes donations from civic groups, clubs, and individuals. Erickson says the audit report suggests that further inquiries be made into the accounts. Erickson questions the legality of the 2 accounts, which he says may have posed a conflict of interest. He says his request was made just to clear the air.
I think I owe it, or we, the council, owes this to the public, the citizens of Prattville, to get to the bottom of it and clear the air. And I certainly hope that everything is legal and above board when they complete their investigation or inquiry.
But Mayor Seagrave Price doesn't share Erickson's concerns. He says any possible misuse of funds in the accounts set up by past administrations has been corrected since he's been in office.
And our city attorney tells us that there's no criminal, there's no criminal activity, no embezzlement of funds or anything like that. There's maybe some accounting changes needed to be made, which we've made.
Fire department spokesmen say they welcome an investigation, and the Ethics Commission won't confirm or deny the request. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Prattville. Erickson is concerned about the legality of the fire department's 2 accounts. One is the Fireman's Fund, which includes money raised by the firefighters. That account doesn't involve city money. The second is the fire department's fund. Mayor Seagrave Price says it has been abolished, but the donations have been placed in a special city account.
Erickson says an April 2nd special audit report suggests that further inquiries be made into the accounts. He says his report to the Ethics Commission is made just to clear the air. But the mayor doesn't share Erickson's concern.
And I don't see any reason why we should have to go through the Ethics Commission again and pull the city of Prattville through the mud like we had to go through the last time we went through all this over something that there's not even a problem on. There's not even a problem.
Fire department officials say they welcome an investigation. Fire Chief Donald Magoo is expected to hold a news conference soon, and the Ethics Commission won't confirm or deny the request. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Prattville.
Plants did your men seize inside? 102 plants, anywhere from 6 foot to 12 foot tall.
How about a dollar value?
I'd say over 100.
Right. With regard to Section 5 pre-clearance, which requires covered jurisdiction.
Just down an oil well, just this is a little while away from the town, so
Despite the increases in the number of minorities elected to office, minorities remain seriously underrepresented in the 4 states studied. For instance, in Alabama in 1980, blacks represented 25.6% of the population, but only 5.7% of the elected officials. Data on minority registration, too, indicate that substantial gaps between black and white voter registration that existed prior to the enactment of the Voting Rights Act have not been totally eliminated. From the Department of Justice. Data obtained from the Department of Justice show that from 1975
44-year-old Jack Tice of Montgomery, 24-year-old Sherman Casey of Prattville, 23-year-old Deborah Thomas, and 22-year-old Donnie Sullivan of Dothan were scheduled to appear before Montgomery District Court Judge Newman Sankey today on robbery charges. The preliminary hearing was cut short by Assistant District Attorney Ken Mendelson when he informed Judge Sankey that 3 of the 4 defendants in court today have been indicted by the Montgomery County Grand Jury on theft of property charges. Mendelson then moved that robbery charges against the 4 be dropped. Judge Sankey approved Mendelson's motion, which means all charges against Thomas have now been dropped by the court. Tice and Casey are being held in Montgomery County Jail on $100,000 bond, while Cindy Casey of Prattville and Sullivan are free on bond after the 4 were indicted on theft of property charges. Although the robbery charges have been dropped or null pros in the district court level, all the defendants still can be indicted by the Montgomery County Grand Jury on those charges. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.